drive you to alcohol. Okay, shall we carry on? Now in the break somebody asked me about where do we find these epsilon values that we just discussed, and the answer is sometimes they are experimentally determined, and you can look them up either on the interweb, or there have been data published about loads and loads of compounds. And usually they are called handbooks, where these data are in there. That means you need at least 2 hands to carry these books, because they are massive. Yeah. But if you do a standard curve, something like something like that, where you have your concentration and absorbance, you have something like that, you measure an absorbance, as I said, AX for an unknown concentration. All you need to do is go over and go down, Cx. You actually don't need to worry about the epsilon, because you can read off your unknown concentration straight away from this standard curve. So very often you get away with not having to deal with these epsilons. Okay? And another question was, what is this L in the Beer-Lambert law? Yeah, data molesters, exactly, DMs. When we said A equals C times L times epsilon, what is this L? And the L is actually, and that's quite important, the L is only the size of your cuvette. light goes through air or vacuum or whatever without any bother. It is just the path length of your cuvette that the light has to go through where it will encounter the absorbing material. That is the L. I can have, for example, I can shoot a laser beam straight up there. And at the top of the stairs, there is a 1 centimeter cuvette. L, in this case, would be just 1 centimeter. That is how the light has to go through the absorbing part. Does that make sense? Yes?
Is the material that makes up the cuvette?
Excellent question. Very good question. The question is, what about the material that makes up the cuvette? Now, if this material absorbs the light that I use, it's no good. Because it will absorb the light, and it will basically be me like shining a torch onto a black plastic bin liner, and I try to figure out what is in this bin liner. Wouldn't work, would it? The plastic bin liner absorbs the light. So the material of the cuvette must not interact with the light at that particular wavelength. Make sense? Answers your question?
I was thinking more like light refraction.
Okay, again, what you want is your light beam go straight through. It should not be scattered in any way. It should not be reflected from the material in the cuvette or from the substance itself. The only thing that should happen is that the light interacts with the molecules it's supposed to interact in the cuvette and be absorbed. No reflection. Yeah? Right. Is anything working here? Ooh. Okay. I think I just have to quickly refresh that. I might have lost something. Okay, now we are in business. Now, what we have done here, actually, we have created a correlation between concentration and absorbance. This is called a correlation. And in a correlation, what we do here with a standard graph or standard curve, what we do is we have some known concentrations. And these are the things that I can prepare, these concentrations. They are known as the independent variable. So I prepare different concentrations, to C1, C2, C3, C4, C5. I prepare that. Then do something, and I get my absorbance. And in this case, this is called the dependent variable. Dependent on what is it dependent? Well, it depends on my concentration. Usually, the independent variable is plotted on the x-axis, and the dependent variable is plotted on the y-axis. Sort of convention. Had you done your degree a few years earlier, and had you done the module BI 301, Enzymes and Metabolism, with me, I would have shown you one exemption of this rule. But since I'm no longer teaching on this module, you are safe. So don't worry about it. So that is really what you will encounter independent dependent variable. Okay, so, hey, let's plot. You have encountered something like that before, probably during A-levels, but also in the practical this week, where you were plotting the amount of milliliter that you added and the grams that you measured and that you weighed, basically, yeah? And what you found probably was the more water you added, the heavier it was. True? Makes sense in a way. So you would get something like that. More or less a straight line. Well, if I could draw properly. In this case, we have what is called a positive correlation. Positive correlation, that means dependent and independent variable move in the same direction. If the independent becomes larger, the dependent variable becomes larger. If the independent variable becomes smaller, then the dependent variable becomes smaller. So they move in the same direction. Yeah? That is called a positive correlation. Of course, we can have a negative correlation. Negative correlation would be something like that. Negative correlation, and I just simply abbreviate that because I'm too lazy to write that. Dependent and independent move in opposing directions or in opposite directions. Opposite directions. In our case, the larger here, the larger our independent variable becomes, the smaller the dependent variable. Yeah? And we can have a third case. Where the data points are just simply randomly scattered. In this case, you would probably say no correlation. Because whatever the independent variable does, the dependent variable doesn't give a damn. That would be zero correlation. Now, how could we put that a little bit more into something useful? There's actually something that is extremely useful. This is called Pearson's R, or Pearson's correlation coefficient. And it is usually abbreviated with an R, lowercase r. That's why it's called Pearson's R. What is Pearson's R? Pearson's R is a fairly complicated equation, which I'm not going to show you. I'm not going to expect you to know this, how you derive it, but you need to know what Pearson's R actually says. Pearson's R is a numerical value between -1 and +1. And it gives the degree of correlation. So, a positive R value of +1 indicates perfect positive correlation. Or in other words, all the points are exactly on a line of best fit. That is what +1R would look like. -1 would look like that. Again, perfect line of best fit. All the points, all the measured points are on a straight line of the best fit. That is -1. And negative because dependent and independent move in different directions, move in opposite directions. But life is not always perfect. You can have any value between plus and minus. So for example, I just make something up here now. Something like that. Is it positive or negative? It's a positive correlation because both move in the same direction. Absolutely right. Is it perfect? No. So that, I would guess, is probably around R equals plus 0.95. I would have a guess. It looks like a strong positive correlation. And we are talking about strong correlations if R is around, is larger than, say, 0.85 or so, or if R is smaller than negative 0.85. That I would consider as a strong correlation. Then you have medium correlations, you have weak correlations. What would that be? R equals 0, what does that indicate? There's no correlation. So whatever you find, there's no, the data are not in any way correlated. Does that make sense? How do you get the correlation coefficient? Here I have an Excel spreadsheet, but it also works in Google Sheets if you prefer that. Now what I have here is an independent variable. You probably can't see that. Well, yes, you can. You see the independent and the dependent variable. And I've tried to plot that. So on the x-axis, I have the independent, and on the y-axis, I have the dependent variable. And that would be the graph to it. Is it a positive or negative or no correlation? Loud? What is it?
Positive.
It's a positive correlation. You're absolutely right. It goes up with both dependent and independent variable moving in the same direction. So it's a positive correlation. Is it 100%? Is it a 1? Is it a plus 1? No. So how do we find that? Well, there is a function in Excel. I'm going to show you what you need to do. In Excel, each equation starts with an equal sign. And now you try simply to, you type Corel. And this is a built-in correlation function that gives you the R value. So it asks you for the first array, that is your independent, and the second array, in this case, you get your correlation coefficient, and that is 0.967, 0.97. Strong correlation? Yes or yes?
Yeah.
So, it is a strong correlation. Great. There is something happening. These data are somehow related. Right? Now let's talk a little bit about this relatedness. Because this leads us into data abuse. The first thing that abusers do is they say, right, I have a correlation. Positive or negative? So positive R value. Good correlation, strong correlation or not? Strong correlation is probably around 0.99. Sometimes it's also given in percent, so it would be 99.5% correlation. Yeah? Very strong correlation. And now these data abusers say, we use that to predict the future. If that is a standard curve, we just simply measure an unknown concentration and the absorbance is up here. So I just simply go over here, or just extend that a little bit, and then measure, oh yeah, that's my Cx here. Right? This is what a typical data abuser would do. Why is it bad? Because we don't have data in that range here. We only have data down here. We have no idea what this curve is doing beyond the last data point. True? I show you what happens in real life if you do something like that. Let's see if I find an example for that. Here is the adult obesity rate in the beautiful state of Alabama in the US. Do we have any people from the US? Hands up. Are you from Alabama? California. Thank God for that. So otherwise I would get a lot of stick, you know. Anyone else from the US? Cleveland. That's Ohio. That's okay. You are safe. Anyone else? No? Excellent. Now, here it shows a really worrying trend, doesn't it? In the 1990s, we had about 10% obesity in Alabama with all the health problems. 20 years later, we had around 35% obesity. So every 20 years, it's 25% more obesity. So after another 20 years, it would be another 25. So we are from 35, we go to 60% in the year 2035. We have 60%. In the year 2055, we have 85%. In the year, I lost track, but another 20 years later, we have 110% obesity in Alabama. And then we have 135%. That means if you measure 100 people, 135 of these 100 are obese. That somehow doesn't sound right, does it? Where do they come from? I mean, there might be people from California or other states moving in, right? But still that doesn't make sense. If you look at 100 and see 135 being obese, I suggest you stop smoking that stuff. Yeah? That is why you cannot extrapolate things. A correlation does not allow you to go beyond the last point that you've actually measured. If you do, sorry, you are a data abuser. And you will be punished. Oh, how can you give 110% effort? Well, the answer is very simple. It's just a simple mathematical concept. If you work 24 hours a day on your studies, and you also skip breaks, that gives you an additional hour. If you don't go to the toilet, you again get another hour, so you have 26 hours in the day. So if people say 110% effort, this is bullshit. You can only do 100%. Yes? And that is just a phrase. I'm standing 200% behind you. What the? Right? Either I'm standing behind you or I don't. But 200%, that means, Klapper has doubled. The world isn't ready for that. Okay? So please do me a favor. It sounds great. I'm 100% behind you. Yeah, that's good. I'm 120% behind you. I put in 120% effort. Bollocks. So that was the one thing. Extrapolation. No. We don't extrapolate. The other thing is, and that is probably even worse, glad that you're 150% awake, It's a good thing to be 100 and... The other thing is that people confuse correlation with causation. And let me tell you a story about that. 1952 it happened in Sweden. And it caused some biologists a true and remarkable crisis. 7 years after the war, they did a census in a little district in Sweden. And they measured the number of babies over the time. Babies born over the time. And what they found was something like that. So far, so good. Over time, more babies get born. And then some biologists came along and they said, oh, we made a very interesting observation. We measured how many breeding pairs of storks, the bird, stork, of storks are in the area. What they found was that. Can you anticipate what's coming? So there is a perfect correlation if you take this part here and try to do a correlation. Storks versus babies. What do you think you will get? Positive correlation, right? R equals 0.99. A very strong positive correlation. No, of course, this means that babies are delivered by storks. Ah, yeah. I know. You didn't expect that, did you?
No.
And while it is true, and we have evidence for that, if you just watch one of my favorite Disney movies, Dumbo. Dumbo, the little flying elephant, is delivered by a stork. So we have visual evidence that babies are delivered by storks, right? If you are a biologist, you have a midlife crisis now. You have a correlation, right? Correlation is good. It tells us that something is going on. But it does not tell us that one thing is the cause for another thing. Yes, we see more storks. Yes, we see more babies. But there could be 1,000,001 reasons for it. Here's another example for you. You have probably encountered that in one of your induction talks. Lecture attendance versus grades. Has somebody said something like that? Yeah? And what did I tell you?
The less lectures we go to, the better our grades.
The less lectures you go to, the better the grades. Oh, the higher the grades. Oh, sorry. So there's a positive correlation, right? Something like that. Did I tell you that? I was worried about that. Now, if you think about it for a moment, what should we do? We want students to get good grades. So what shall we do? If we force the students to come to the lectures, we get great lecture attendance, and as a result, every student will get good grades. Ha! Problem solved. So that's why we measure the lecture attendance. Because the thinking is, if you are here, you will get good grades. By default. That is what this graph says. Is that true? No. It measures something completely different. I can't prove it. I haven't done the experiment, but here is a hypothesis. A student who is highly motivated student will try to attend as many lectures as possible, right? So there's a positive correlation between motivation and lecture attendance. A highly motivated student will also do all the extra reading, will do the exercises, etc., etc., will learn very effectively. So that will be great. Let's go back to black. This is attendance. And now, if you do that, of course, you see attendance and grades are like that. Like the stork example. So going to lectures, yeah, it's good because you find out what's going on. You get some keywords that you then later can look up if you are so inclined. You have social interaction. You also get passed on all the germs that the entire class have. Right? So going to lectures is not a bad thing necessarily. But making this jump and say, only if you are, exactly, if you sleep during a lecture, what's the point? Sleep in your bed, it's far more comfortable. Yeah? If you are motivated, it's not a problem. The linking factor is the motivation. And that is what lots of people forget. Now, you probably think, actually, it's not such a big deal. I can live with the storks and the babies. I know it came as a shock to you. If you like, we can later on have a quiet word and I can tell you how it works. I mean, obviously there won't be any practical demonstrations, but okay, lectures and things like that. Yeah, okay, fine, I get that. What about this? Number of immigrants. Plotted versus the unemployment rate. You probably see something like that. What kind of correlation is that? Positive, negative? It's a positive. Strong, weak? It's a pretty strong correlation. In fact, it's probably around 90% or something like that. What was that? Didn't get that? What did he say?
I'm coming for your job, Clever.
Well, you're not the only one. If you are very lucky, I don't set any exams for you because Brexit was before that. Do you see the problem with that? I think we need to take control of our borders.
You don't know. Because then you have to leave.
Absolutely, you are right. But you see, I've been here for such a long time. I'm British. Actually, I'm so British, I have to tell you that. I'm so British that the other day, somebody from the village where we live asked me if I want to join the cricket team. And I said, are you crazy? You know, I don't understand cricket. Nobody does. Yeah, I'm so glad you say that, you know. I just like the guy in the lab coat who goes like. But, you know, I don't understand cricket. Why do they all wear the same thing? I mean, I understand football, the concept, but cricket, I don't know. And he said, okay, if you don't want to join the cricket team, I understand it, but we have bell ringing practice every Thursday. I said, what bell ringing practice? What the heck is that? I'm sorry, I'm not British, right? But do you see what I mean here with this example? Unemployment, number of immigrants. And people believe that. It could be something completely different. Number of unemployment very clearly has something to do with the economy. If the economy is bad, unemployment is high. Yeah? That's fair enough. Number of immigrants probably has nothing to do with it. There's no correlation between, it could very well be that in other countries, economy is bad as well, and therefore people think, right, let's try to leave our country and go to a place where perhaps it is still better. Yeah? So if you've got a global economic crisis, then this is something that you would expect by default. Does that say anything about them blaming immigrants taking away our jobs? And that has been the argument, hasn't it? God, I'm getting political here. Does that make sense? Yeah? So, when you are dealing with data, always question, is there a causation? In the case of our experiment, where we have concentration versus absorbance, and we see something like that, we can assume that there's a causation because we know that the higher the concentration of a substance, the more the light will be blocked, right? So we can say, yes, there is a causation. But if somebody is trying to sell you that there is a very strong causation between the sale of ice cream and the incidence of skin cancer. Actually, there is a very strong correlation between them. Ice cream sale and skin cancer. And it goes like that, positive correlation. How do you explain that? Ice cream is bad for you, right? It causes skin cancer. Or you can turn that around and say, right, people who suffer from skin cancer eat more ice cream. Well, there could be a joining factor, a linking factor actually. It could very well be that if you live in a warm country with a lot of sunshine, people like to eat ice cream because, you know, that is what you do when it's hot. And at the same time, if there's a lot of sunshine, there's a lot of potential skin cancer problems. But making the causal connection between the two is a definite no-no. So don't be a data molester. Think about these things. On that note, have a lovely weekend and enjoy.